Welcome to another edition of Working with Gen Z. Friends, today we're going to look at an episode where we'll examine and understand this concept of first generational professionals. Who are the first generational professionals? And does that bring a particular challenge or opportunity if you are a first generational professional at the workplace? Now, contrary to what it may seem, is that something that would be applicable to the older generation like a boomer or an X or a millennial? You could be a first generation professional in any of those generations, including the Gen Z. And we want to examine that their unique context, unique background. Does that pose challenges? Does that come with a certain constraint as they come to the workplace? And if so, what are the ways in which companies can help? What can they do? But we need to kind of unpeel a few layers before we get to that. And to help me with that is my ex-colleague and a good friend and an expert. I'm very happy to invite Michelle Brewer. Michelle, welcome to the show.
Nikhil, wonderful to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. So, Michelle, I know you've been spending a lot of time on this subject. You are the expert, so I'm going to get to all my questions. But before that, would you kindly just share for our listeners, our viewers, a little bit about your background, your story, and what you do?
Indeed. Well, I am a first generation professional myself, which means I'm among the first members of my family to enter the white collar world. I'm also the first American in my family. My family emigrated to the States in the 60s and 70s, and I was the first born here. By way of background professionally, I am a former journalist on the sports desk in Philadelphia. And for American listeners familiar with sports, you know what that should speak about my constitution. Philly can be a rough town. But that being said, I transitioned out of Philly into leadership development completely by accident. But it's been a really fantastic journey. I've been in the field for about 20 years and currently work for myself, leading my own firm, PEM Leadership. We do executive coaching, all manner of custom executive education, talent management consultation. And most recently, we are developing thought leadership on first generation professionals.
All right. Fantastic. Well, very happy to have you here, Michelle. I know we've been trying to do this for some time and glad this has worked out. And incidentally, I had also spent 2 years in Philadelphia. And you better support the right teams if you're if you're in Philly. But yeah, pleasant memories. Incidentally, the town I lived was also called Media, Pennsylvania.
Oh, right. I know media. Sure.
Yeah, so but really nice 2 years there. Other than the cold weather, I think it's all good. All right, so Michelle, let's get to it. You're gonna help us on a very unique topic, very unique subject, which relates to all generations. But we're gonna dive a little bit deeper in the Gen Z context, but after maybe just setting the base and setting the context in the background. So first, help us to understand, who is a first generational professional and what makes them, when we give that label or that connotation, what's unique about that?
Right. Well, first of all, thank you in your intro to making clear that first generation professionals exist everywhere. And while you are the Gen Z expert, I think it's a really, really important point to make that FGPs are a subset of many different populations here. So another thing to point out is that there is no one definition of first generation professional. So ours is derived from what the U.S. Department of Commerce uses, which is a first generation professional is among the first in their immediate family to obtain a 4-year college degree and or obtain a higher level professional position than what was held by either parent. So some examples of first generation professionals include Howard Schultz, who is the founder and former CEO of Starbucks, media mogul Oprah Winfrey. And broadly speaking, these are people who come from working class backgrounds. But it's not always so straightforward because, let's say, in the case of immigrants to this country who have parents who are highly educated in another country, those degrees perhaps are not honored in the US, and therefore they do not first have the access to the professional positions they once had in their countries of origin. And with that, they do not have the social capital or networks that allow for professional ascent. So, again, it's a hard definition to explain concisely, but broadly speaking, working class and first in your families to try to make it in the white collar world in the environment you're in.
Okay. Yeah. No, I think you've given a pretty good general definition, which just sets the background of who and how do we define a first generational professional. Now, can you share some typical challenges, like let's say the FGP, if you are an FGP, that they would face, considering their family background and when you talk about the professional goals and ambitions, right? What are some typical obviously, as you mentioned, that they come from a working class background, right? So what challenges does that pose?
Yes. The main challenges that FGP face are all due to the fact that they're the first in their families to navigate these unfamiliar worlds. Perhaps the professional white collar world is the unfamiliar. For a new immigrant, it could be the professional white collar world plus being in a new country. And when you're the first, you do not have immediate access to the insight and experiences, say that a grandfather or a grandmother, well, less so in the United States because women's equality in the workforce is a rather recent phenomenon, but you get the point. When you have family members who have walked those halls and sat at those tables, there is so much knowledge that is transferred to you during family conversations. And further, you have access to social networks, perhaps at social organizations or community volunteering, country clubs, things like this, where relationships are built and networks are established. So the first gap is that first generation professionals don't have access to these people and therefore cannot absorb this kind of information. And the second gap is as a result of not having these people around them to explain how ascension occurs in the white collar world, they're playing a different game. First generation professionals can have wonderfully supportive families who are really, really proud of them and can support the success. And the extent of their encouragement and advice is do well in school and work hard. And that's great advice, and it's incomplete advice. It also leads to the idea that the gain of the degree itself is enough. And that's only part of the puzzle in terms of what an individual needs. Individuals also need social capital, networks, strong relationships, mentorship, and sponsorship in order to ascend. So the biggest gap is that they just don't have the people around them and therefore don't have the capability of understanding the worlds that they're in. Finally, another significant challenge they face is that FGPs aren't aware of what they're capable, and therefore set goals for themselves that are associated more with stability versus ascent. So if we think about the fact that in the United States, 81% of first generation college students cite financial stability, not wealth, right, as their reason for wanting to go to college, it sets a bar down here. But if you think about, and if we study the richness of their experiences and these challenges they've gone through that really, really show their determination and potential, they should be aiming up here. But they don't know how to translate what they have into capabilities that lead to successful work up here at this level.
Yeah, no, excellent. Yeah, I think I do want to, Michelle, just to clarify a couple of things. You in the very first question, you gave examples. I suspect when you're referring to first generation, I mean, in a country like US, obviously you see immigrants from every part of the world, but it's not confined. You're not claiming an FGP necessarily who could be an immigrant. You could be a local
Yes.
yeah, right.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's what makes FGPs, so great as like a concept and as an identity. So our mutual friend who we work with, two mutual friends that we work with at Duke CE are, you know, they've been in this country forever, and they're white guys in their 60s.
Yeah.
They're FGPs. I'm an FGP. FGPs range every experience and identity in this country
Yeah.
and around the world.
Sure. And also, when you mentioned about that, there isn't a past reference point for them from families or cousins or an extended family, whether it's the way to go into the corporate world or education. Is it also fair to say that when you talk about FGPs, that would you say that the FGP also kind of from their background? I mean, is financial constraint something that would you say is common among FGPs, or may or may not be the case? I mean, you do say working class, so I'm just wondering that does that also sort of almost like stand out in their story?
100%. So they often come from lower median income households. They're starting school later. Um, Many of them have dependents. So they might be supporting multi-generational families, or including having their own children. And on top of that, first generation college students enter the workforce with more student debt and having accepted lower starting salaries, largely because they don't have the resources to just do some benchmarking, and they have no sense of what they're actually worth. And second, they're just happy to be there because they're focused on stability, and this is what the income is what they're after.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So that's helpful. All right. Let's turn now. You've explained this very nicely in what they are, their context. Now let's focus our attention to Gen Zs. Michelle, what's in your experience, considering how you described an FGP? Do you sense that a Gen Z, and again, this could be in the U.S. context, do you sense that uh, that generation obviously is unique in their own way with what has happened with in their 25 odd years of their life, which means that they've seen wars and they've seen pandemic and they're born into social media, and so that it's quite unique, but given some of that as a common denominator, do you sense that the FGP, and again I'm asking a little more general question for the Gen Zs, have all of what we've seen, is that made it tougher, or is it no different for the Gen Z, as an FGP?
I think it's tougher or easier in some respects and no different in some others. So explaining that
Sure.
they're digital natives and they have so much exposure to content. So Gen Z FGPs likely have an advantage when it comes to resources that demystify the white collar world a bit. So whether it's in the form of a comedic, TikTok influencer that jokes about their white collar job, or they have access to e-learning videos that actually talk about self-awareness in the workplace, that's more knowledge than, certainly boomers or Xers had. Millennials were on the cusp of that. So boomers and Xers kind of entered these white collar environments without knowing, what they were stepping into. That being said, Gen Zs have, with all of this content, so much of the world open to them. But I would say that, or I would venture that Gen Zs who are FGPs perhaps do not feel as though that expansive world is as available to them as a continuing generation person, Gen Z person might, in that they still have, financial burdens. They still have the the discomfort that comes with being the first in your family to do something. So while they might want to be a TikTok influencer or a creator, that could feel a little less accessible to them. Uh, and you and I both know that Gen Z gets a bad rep when it comes to employee retention numbers. And my counsel to companies is, if you're looking at early career retention strategies, consider an FGP focused recruiting identification and recruiting strategy to get people in the door who are not going to be inclined to like look around and see what's out there, because they want to be stable. And we know that Gen Z want development opportunities. They value mental health. They want a place where they can grow and blossom. So if a company can do that for a Gen Z FGP, they will have their construct of who Gen Zs are a bit, reshaped.
Yeah, no, I'm I'm really kind of just curious now to ask so many follow-up questions on that, Michelle. So let's start with two. The first one here is, do you sense, because a lot of your work or a good chunk of your portfolio, you're focusing on the FGPs, do you sense that, first help us to understand that, um, there are certain common misunderstanding or biases that companies um, keep or have when they're bringing on incoming FGPs, and especially for Gen Zs. And very interesting that you mentioned about really kind of creating almost a separate drive for recruiting Gen Zs for FGP. So tell us a little more on that, as well as to what may have you seen is that result into better retention, and why. So maybe the first question is, we talk about uh, the first question. Let's address that first, and then we'll come to the next one. Yeah, are there biases, misunderstanding when you think about a typical Gen Z who is an FGP? Yeah.
I don't think companies know they're recruiting FGPs, but if you look at where companies recruit, so if you're recruiting specifically from the Ivy League in the United States,
Yeah.
you're not going to get a lot of first generation professionals.
Mhm.
However, if you are recruiting from major state universities in the United States, like where I went, Penn State University, for my undergraduate,
Sure.
you will get a good number of first generation professionals. So a lot is unknown about, and even the term FGPs is relatively unknown here. It's something that is gaining more traction, and proudly we believe we're at the
Creating more
forefront of
awareness.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So that it's exciting. In the US, more attention is given to first generation college students, and I'll talk more about that in a second. But to your point about bias, no, it's not there, because companies don't know that they are hiring people who are, I mean, I think they implicitly know,
Yeah.
but it's not something that is top of mind for them as something to plan for, or, as as an identity or as a set of experiences that present opportunities for them and the FGP. If they can create a compelling employee value proposition for a first generation professional, they will have that employee for a really long time.
Yeah. So in other words, it's like the playing field is quite level. They have as good a chance, or if they're kind of an incoming freshman, if you will, kind of in the work world. It's really up to them, how they kind of drive that path, right? That there's no certain disadvantage. I mean, there's a disadvantage from maybe a reference or the prior exposure point of view, but companies see, if they've picked up 10 people from a school, let's say 10 in total, then, 3 from school X and then school Y, right? Everyone gets the same chance, I suppose, right?
Right. So they'll see them all as, yes, they're good kids, and they're going to make great employees because they come from this school. We know they've gotten a good education. But you're right in calling back to the experiences that they don't have and the things they don't know how to do in the workforce. So they will have confidence in the new hires, but they won't know how to accelerate their development and make the most of this investment in terms of the things that these employees need as first generation professionals.
Okay. So we'll come to that because if you're a Gen Z listening to this, I think we would definitely want to touch that question, Michelle, which is to say that what can they do, considering their background and all of that. But let's talk about very briefly. That's the second question that I'd ask to say that, okay, in your view, you're saying that companies can benefit from doing kind of an exclusive or a drive of recruitment who could be solely with FGPs. Why would why and what's the rationale, or what have you seen if anyone's been doing that?
Mhm. So back when we were talking about FGPs being everywhere, and while I come from the US and have a US perspective, it's interesting for me to observe that the first major piece of research that came out on first generation professionals was produced by BCG out of their like Dusseldorf or Vienna offices. So they're thinking about this over there.
Mhm.
And that piece of literature shared that first generation professionals are 32% more likely to be loyal to their employers, 40% more likely to be intrinsically motivated. And of that 40%, 48% are likelier to pursue management positions in later stages of their career. So this tells me that companies can really benefit from finding FGPs as they're onboarding into the program or into their companies, and using that lens to make safer bets or guarantee more ROI on who they're going to develop and who they're going to accelerate for the long term. And that I think can help attrition numbers and fill out the leadership pipeline. And this isn't just germane to early career FGPs and early career retention. There are already FGPs among us in all of the workforces. They just don't know it. So, in the research
Right.
that I've been doing, there are so many people who have said in the interviews I've been doing with them, I'd never heard of this until we started talking about it. And holy cow, if I knew that I just didn't have a chip on my shoulder, that people were getting advantages and opportunities that I wasn't, and could apply this framework, then I could, I could have made more specific asks about what could have helped me excel. So companies paying attention to FGPs as a group of employees who they are likelier to hold on to and have the ambition helps them feel more comfortable in making the investments they need to simultaneously get more impact out of the FGP and give the FGP opportunities they did not know existed.
Yeah, but so the one question, the obvious question, again, without going too deep into that, would there be a way for a company to find that or profile that and sort of a legal comfortable way? Because I do agree with the point that you're making, because I know myself, Michelle, many years back, prior to the many years that we did work Duke together. I was with a school where we had this one entrepreneur who wanted to recruit for his market research agency in Singapore, and he specifically actually told me when he came down to say that, look, I'm really not looking for sort of the high flyer. I want the quiet person in the back of the room, and maybe someone who's come from a small town. So in many ways, one could say that it almost could be like someone with a working class background and was much more hungry, much more willing, much more sort of you know uh, you know uh, kind of ready to go and get it, and didn't have too much to complain. And so it's what's been your experience, as you recommend that, yeah, companies can benefit, which makes good sense. Are there companies who are doing it, and how would they kind of know? Is there a way, maybe some ways in which we can do that during the recruiting process?
Yes. So the activity that I have seen as far as FGPs goes at this stage is that there are ERGs starting to be formed. And this is a mechanism of self-identification. So for FGPs who are already in the workforce, um, it would seem that the easiest way to begin testing what FGP focused strategies could work and piloting these things come from self-identification with folks already in the workforce. However, I think there are huge opportunities in recruiting because if a company can differentiate and say, hey, are you the first in your family to do this? And the kids, or I shouldn't call them kids, but the first generation college students who are seeking their first jobs see that and they're like, oh, okay. That's a place where I feel safer. That's a place that feels like it's willing to listen to me. And in accordance with that, if you kind of reconsider your interview process and how you look for candidates, and if your previous way was to look for 2 internships at these kinds of firms,
Yeah.
and if you didn't have that, if you, just toss that resume off to the side, if you have a first gen professional focused strategy, you actually probe into that and ask why. And the candidate can say, well, I had to work a couple part-time jobs. Probe further, why? Because I help my family pay the mortgage, or I help the family pay the rent, or whatever it is. How compelling is that of a story, right? So it's you're not looking for an apples to apples comparison, but you are seeing the value of the orange in a way that you perhaps hadn't before.
Right. No, absolutely. Yeah. Correct. Because so you do have a distinct advantage, and I'm sure, like in the numbers or the statistics that you were talking about, I'm pretty sure. Again, Michelle, we had one of our clients from our previous company where we did a kind of a focus group of what were their career aspirations, and I can say that in a country like India where you have all your what we call tier one cities. So these are like your big towns, like the Mumbai, Delhi, and some of these big towns, and those kids or those college students are they have access to any kid, whether it's New York or any part of the world. Like they travel, they watch the same sitcoms and everything. But when they were trying to recruit for this manufacturing company, they actually felt that when we got people from smaller towns, incidentally, interestingly, they were much more willing to kind of go into a factory to begin their career, or to a plant without worrying too much about, on the weekends, I'm going to be stuck in there. Just, I will not have as much of a social life. So that's a good point. Now let's turn focus, and since we're talking about Gen Z, what would you say, Michelle, for the FGPs in the Gen Z category, right? What can they do as an incoming, a Gen Z incoming into the corporate world to prepare to give that extra edge, right? Perhaps if we have to do the peer-to-peer comparison, not having access to resources, not having access to any past reference points in families and so on, right? Are there certain skills that you would recommend coming before they come into the corporate world, right? So maybe we talk about that and what have you seen?
Gen Zs are gifted with so many things, and chief among them is, I think, really valuing humanity and being curious about the world and valuing people and valuing human experiences. And while they understand and that activity to have a lot of social value, they would really, really benefit if they just, turn the dial on that a little bit and make the connection between social and professional and begin thinking about, okay, like, yes, I like being around this person and I think they're fun and they're cool and they make me laugh. And, how do I keep this connection alive and warm and interesting for both of us? Because I think, who knows, we might end up doing something professionally together. So it's using that skill and that advantage as as something to leverage in terms of professional networks. The second thing they have is that, this really, personality forward way of being, and that, they are not afraid of being themselves. And I think that's fantastic. And it's so refreshing. And there's so much written about Gen Z. There's so much to, quote unquote, demystify and understand, such that I don't think that they realize when they walk into a professional setting, people will have preconceived notions or, you know, a great sense of either curiosity or a formed opinion on what these folks are going to bring into the workforce. And I would encourage FGP Gen Zs to use their personality forward ways, and the way that they do when they leverage relationships is to break barriers inside
Yeah.
corporate environments. And hey, let's I want to learn about your experiences. I want to hear how you do work. Oh, let me show you this AI tool that I found handy. Maybe that it's permissible in this workplace, maybe it's not. But I think there's such an opportunity to cross-pollinate ideas and ways of working that Gen Z can really lead the way on in the workplace. And to a Gen Z FGP, I don't know how comfortable they're going to feel doing this because they're in a new setting. We're asking them to be more visible than they perhaps would like. But it's an opportunity for them to showcase their unique value as somebody who has a fresh set of eyes and um, an eagerness to share what is native to them and what is natural to them.
Okay. Yeah. No, I think, yeah, that's good advice. And as you say, they bring something unique, right? It's leveraging that and kind of trying to, bring what's missing and how do you catapult yourself from there? What about Michelle? What about the fact that perhaps as an FGP, would it be fair to say that maybe they have some additional, and this is across other generations, where they may have additional family responsibilities or obligations and so on. So, what advice would you give, or what have you seen where do you sense that, does that kind of go against them when they're in the corporate world, or what advice would you give that they try and balance now a new chapter in their life, which is, first in their families, first amongst, their community or whatever, right? As college or a professional world, but then they also have perhaps a little more responsibility maybe than a peer. So how can they balance that?
There's so much to be written about FGPs, and there's so much research to do. And where I want to get to with this eventually, I have multiple goals for this work, but it's to help FGPs work towards whole person development. So what do I mean by that? First generation professionals, as the first of their families, supporting working class families, often don't have two extra nickels to rub together. And when they are the first in their families to achieve um, the professional status they have with the income that comes with that, there's huge responsibility in supporting other members of the family and perhaps, or very likely, paying off that student loan debt. And in addition to that is the mental burden of being uncomfortable at work, feeling like an imposter. In our research, where we have interviewed dozens of first generation professionals, everyone cited being afraid that they would lose what they had achieved. And they knew they were being viewed as role models within their families and perhaps their larger communities. That's a lot of pressure. And when you are afraid of losing, all you do is push. So the first thing that I would say is that it is more than okay, and in fact, it is necessary to put yourself on your to-do list when it comes to taking care of yourself and doing the things you need to do to sustain the lifestyle that you have created for yourself. Um, Again, so many, 81% of first gen college students cite financial stability as the reason for going into the white collar world to begin with. You will not be able to sustain that financial stability if you burn out. So, um, having that threat as being something that you want to avoid and stay ahead of is probably not something that FGPs think about, let alone prioritize. And, we're here to say that's a non-negotiable if you're thinking about how you're going to be around for the long run.
Yeah. 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 No, I think very good advice. And, you know, yeah, it's just that I think, can we help them through what you've just said to pause and see just a slightly different lens in addition to everything that they've achieved amidst their constraints or amidst their context. So I think that's good advice. And let's talk, Michelle. Any from all the work that you do, any success stories or anyone that you can think of, either in your practice or of a company where there is kind of the story about here was one FGP who and I'm sure there are colleagues that are just there, but to where you may have seen someone to go from point A to point B, and something that you can share that you feel like maybe others can listen and kind of inspire, take some inspiration.
I hear throughout the course of our research and interviewing FGPs so many stories of persistence and drive and grit. And in every case, every individual said, I never thought what I have was in my reach. So I just encourage FGPs to, not be bound by their own sense of what is good and what is great. And I think what's most encouraging in the stories that I heard through the research we've been doing is that every FGP we spoke to said that they were able to ascend professionally as a result of other people seeing their potential and capability and giving them an opportunity. And in almost every case, the FGPs we interviewed said when presented this opportunity, "Oh, me? Okay, I will, because I trust you and because I don't want to let you down." And I think that just says so much about two major things. So number one, constitutionally, FGPs are loyal and they will value the opportunities they are presented with, and will do everything they can to deliver to their fullest capability. And second, gosh, like what a powerful model for paying it forward. Another thing that I think that we will prove in some time is that FGPs make more engaged leaders because they understand the invaluable impact another person taking an interest in them and showing them an opportunity they didn't know was in their reach was in fact available to them. And my gosh, does the world need that kind of energy these days?
Yeah, absolutely, Michelle. I was going to ask you just that do you find that, considering what the background that they have, when they rise up, do you sense that they actually become much more empathetic, or they kind of almost go extend their hand a bit more? And it's not to be critical about their peers or anyone else, but just being very understanding of what it took for them to get there, and if they see someone in that position.
Absolutely. My hypothesis that they're more engaged people leaders because of that empathy you speak of, because they know that it's a harder journey for some and it requires work and support, and they want to be that source of a providing the work with guidance and being a source of support for that person who perhaps is treading that path for the first time.
Yeah. Okay, so I've got a couple of final questions. This is absolutely great just to understand all the different layers of FGP. One question here, Michelle, would be to know that, okay, what can companies do? And we've spoken briefly about it, a little while back. What can companies or even education institutes can do? Some of the do's and don'ts when you think about, grooming or identifying grooming or working with FGP. So one is sort of on the company or on the education institute side, and the other question, the second, would be, what advice would you have? Some do's and don'ts for an FGP, right? I mean, obviously, they're making their way among more hard conditions, but even still, some do's and don'ts. So let's focus first on anything that you feel like our education system, the institutes, whether it's schooling system or the college system can do when you think about the FGPs, and then maybe also companies. So that's the first part of the question.
So colleges and universities in the United States are recognizing the first generation college student experience, and frankly, they have to. So consider that 56% of US college undergraduates are first generation college students. In 2021, there were almost 15.5 million undergraduates in the US. So that means more than 8 million college undergraduates are first generation college students who can become first generation professionals. So the volume is there from the, when we think about these individuals in their college settings. So there are more initiatives there to recognize them and their experiences and offer the support they need to create senses of belonging and to help them land their first jobs. There is this huge gap, frankly, that my team and I are looking to fill to continue to pull that thread through when they become first generation professionals. And the mandate for universities is so significant for these first gen folks as it is, because there are challenges to graduation and helping them feel supported on campus and while they spend their time as students is critical so that they can persist to graduation. But there is so much opportunity that institutions, college institutions, can seek to fill and employers can seek to fill as we look to create more of a transition or a bridge as a first-gen individual goes from college student to professional. So with regard to other things companies can do, so one of the things that we're playing with companies is a FGP specific 1-year onboarding experience. And what does that look like? And with regard to folks who are mid-career or later, how could they function as mentors and sponsors for their peers or these early career people? And how do we use the sum of all of these things as or the combination of people who participate in all these things as candidates for leadership pipeline initiatives? So and the second part of your question, do's and don'ts.
For the FGP Gen Z, yes.
Yeah. Do think of yourself as a first generation professional. So what we have seen in this country, in the United States, is a lot of identification through means such as race, gender, ability, sexual orientation, and a lot of intersectionality there. And that's understandable and that's perfectly reasonable and stands on its own. But what we miss is that, or what we get out of using the first generation professional identity, is that it makes it a little more concrete. The fact that we are the first in our immediate environments to go into this professional workforce situation that is brand new to us. And when we realize we're the first, like the first time you go to a doctor's office that you hadn't been to, or your first time visiting a new city, you assume this mindset of, okay, there's something I need to navigate here. There are going to be things for me to figure out. There are things that I have to understand about this new environment. And just employing that mindset can be extremely helpful in determining what comes naturally to you, what doesn't come naturally to you. It puts you in this space of an outsider where you can observe the norms, like you're like an anthropologist in some ways. You're like, okay, this is how they talk to each other. This is how they eat lunch together or how they don't eat lunch together. And you can pick up a lot of cues that can help inform your thoughts or the questions that you can ask yourself or trusted people around you. And if you don't have trusted people around you, then oops, okay, there's a light bulb that goes off. That's something I need to do. I need to figure out who's going to help me translate this environment.
So, Michelle, are there any groups or sort of clubs? I mean, I don't know if that's the right word, just where the FGPs can identify and kind of come together as a community. Is there anything that's there, or where that you can share for everybody who's listening?
I am seeing more employee resource groups and affinity groups in companies. But in terms of just in general,
Yeah.
no. So we like to think that we do a good job publishing content on LinkedIn for first generation professionals, and we put out a twice monthly newsletter on first generation professionals and the FGP experience. So I will invite anybody to follow me on LinkedIn to get that information.
Okay. Yeah. And that was going to be my final question. You're doing some super work in this space. And obviously, we've covered a lot of good ground today. But as you work more in that, and as you learn more about FGBs, that perhaps where you can share again in a future conversation, where can people find the work that you're doing, and where can people find you as well for all the other things that you do?
Sure. My company, Penn Leadership, has a page on LinkedIn that's BAEM Leadership. And my handle on Instagram is, I'm sorry, my handle on LinkedIn is My Hoover, MYHOOV as in Victor ER.
Okay, well, there you have it. I think I would definitely encourage all our listeners who is an FGP, whether you're a boomer or an X or a millennial or even a Gen Z, to check that out. And I think we have a expert who's dedicated so much time in learning more about the FGPs, right? So and lots of good insight, and nothing can defeat the first-hand insights that you can get from research and the data that's collected. So, Michelle, this has been very, very helpful. A lot of new things, a lot of things that I think I've learned in this concept of FGP, and I hope that all of our listeners, right, Gen Zs as well as the managers, so the companies, or even a professor who's in that school, listening to say that how do we help this unique set of colleagues who are part of our system, and how can we leverage the best from them. So thank you once again, Michelle. Really enjoyed it, and I hope that once again your travels bring you to Asia, or the next time I'm in US, we can meet up and maybe share a coffee.
I would love that. Thank you for having me, Nikhil. This was fun.
Okay, take care and have a good one. Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.